3:12 a.m., Northern Persian Gulf, March 13, 2026. The explosion doesn't announce itself with a roar. It arrives like a metal fist punching through cathedral walls. A 900-foot American oil tanker, the Pacific Sentinel, shudders as 400 pounds of high explosives tear into its hull 3 feet below the waterline. Before anyone on the bridge can react, a second unmanned boat carves through the wake and slams into the opposite side. 2 million barrels of crude oil shift violently. The vessel tilts 5 degrees in 90 seconds. This wasn't piracy. This was Iran's Revolutionary Guard pulling the trigger on a carefully calculated ambush. What happened next over the following 2 hours would completely rewrite the power structure of the Middle East. Iran believed they had constructed something impossible. For 40 years, they studied American military operations in Iraq and analyzed every weakness. They knew they couldn't win a traditional fight against F-35 stealth fighters or Arleigh Burke destroyers, so they built something different. A coastal fortress designed to make any rescue attempt a suicide mission. The Bavar 373 air defense system formed the outer shield, scanning 240 nautical miles of airspace and tracking 300 targets simultaneously. Its Sayed-4 interceptors could reach aircraft at 100,000 feet, traveling at Mach 6. Below that umbrella sat layered radar systems operating on different frequencies, creating electromagnetic chaos that would confuse American jamming technology. But the real danger lived inside the mountains. Iran had carved spider holes into solid rock, reinforced concrete tunnels with massive blast doors hiding Noor and Qatar anti-ship missiles. These weapons stayed invisible to satellites until the moment they launched. The door opens, the rail slides out, the missile fires, and the door closes in seconds. In the shallow 160-foot waters of the Gulf, Iran deployed Yono-class midget submarines, tiny 100-foot diesel-electric ghosts that could sit silently on the seafloor listening for the hum of American nuclear reactors. The entire system was designed as a trap: attack the tanker, force the U.S. Navy to respond, then destroy them in a pre-targeted kill zone. It was brilliant. It had one fatal flaw. The U.S. Navy already had the keys to every lock. While Iran was welding steel and pouring concrete, a different kind of construction was happening in secure facilities across 3 countries. British intelligence, working from GCHQ in Gloucester, had achieved something extraordinary. They successfully tapped the fiber optic cables connecting Iranian command centers to individual air defense batteries. Every order, every status update, every system check was now visible to NATO. But digital access was only half the equation. The human element came from an unexpected source. A high-ranking officer in Iraqi intelligence, codenamed Sadiq, had grown tired of Iranian interference in his country. He provided the U.S. Navy with something priceless: the frequency-hopping pattern of Iran's tactical communications network. Iranian defenses changed radio frequencies thousands of times per second to avoid jamming. Without the pattern, you hear nothing but static. Sadiq handed over the sheet music. Now the U.S. could listen to every conversation, predict every move, and see every vulnerability in real time. The attack on the Pacific Sentinel wasn't a surprise. It was permission. The U.S. let it happen because they needed legal justification for what came next. As the tanker burned, the Navy didn't rush in. They waited for Iran to fully commit their systems, to turn every radar to combat mode, to open their spider holes, to position their submarines. Because the moment you activate a radar at full power, you're not hunting the enemy. You're broadcasting your exact location to anyone listening. Exactly 13 minutes after the explosive boat struck, a silent war began from a windowless building in Fort Meade, Maryland. U.S. Cyber Command, using the intelligence gifts from Britain and Iraq, initiated Black Horizon. They didn't destroy the Iranian network. Destruction is noisy and triggers backup systems. Instead, they injected a ghost loop into the software. Iranian radar operators saw perfectly normal screens showing a calm Gulf with civilian tankers, but their systems had been reprogrammed to ignore specific targets. American F-35s were now invisible, not just because of physical stealth, but because the enemy's own software refused to acknowledge they existed. Simultaneously, British intelligence executed a surgical strike on Iran's encrypted satellite links. The Yono-class submarines waiting on the seafloor suddenly lost contact with their commanders. In submarine warfare, a sub without communication doesn't exist. They were paralyzed, sitting blind while the surface above them prepared to explode. At 3:45 a.m., the physical response began, but it wasn't a bomber fleet. It was ghosts. Dozens of ADM-160 MAL decoys launched from Super Hornets, small jet-powered drones carrying signature augmentation systems that could mimic any aircraft. A single $120,000 drone made Iranian radars think they were seeing B-52 bombers or entire squadrons of F-35s. Iranian commanders, already confused by glitching communications, saw a massive American strike appearing on their screens. They did exactly what their training demanded. They panicked. Spider-hole doors swung open across the coast. Buttons were pushed. Dozens of Sayad-4 missiles, each costing $2 million, roared into the sky chasing plastic decoys worth a fraction of that price. This was the economic trap. Every interceptor that detonated in empty sky represented a catastrophic loss. By 4:05 a.m., Iran had fired over 40 missiles and spent nearly $100 million achieving exactly 0 kills. But the cost wasn't the real disaster. While those missiles chased phantoms, the actual hunters closed in. 2 EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft, positioned 50 miles offshore, turned on their next-generation jammers, focusing beams of high-energy electromagnetic noise directly onto Iranian radars. Operator screens turned white. It's like trying to see through a windshield while someone points a spotlight directly into your eyes. Iranian operators faced an impossible choice: keep the radar on and try to find real targets, or shut it down to save the equipment. Either choice meant death. The U.S. launched AGM-88 missiles specifically designed for this dilemma. These weapons carry 3 different seekers. If the Iranian radar stays on, the missile follows the beam straight to the source. If the operator shuts the radar off, the missile remembers the exact coordinates and continues at Mach 2 to that location. In the final mile, it activates its own internal radar to find the physical antenna. Turn it on, you die. Turn it off, you die anyway. At 4:12 a.m., 8 missiles launched. Iranian coastal radars began dying in white-hot explosions. The eyes of the defense network were being systematically destroyed. With radars dead and interceptor magazines empty, the door was open. But the U.S. didn't send pilots yet. They sent the hammer from below the waves. 40 minutes earlier, as the unmanned boats were being identified, the USS West Virginia submarine received execute orders. An Ohio-class guided missile submarine carries 154 vertical launch cells, and every single one was loaded with a Tomahawk Block 5 cruise missile. These 20-foot cylinders of destruction fly at 550 miles per hour, hugging terrain just 100 feet above the waves. The Navy launched a saturation wave of 80 Tomahawks. Think about the timing. These subsonic missiles take 40 minutes to cross the Gulf. They were launched first, long before the jammers even activated. The entire tactical sequence, the cyber attack, the decoys, the anti-radar strikes, was timed to conclude the exact second the Tomahawk swarm reached the Iranian coastline. Iraqi intelligence had provided precise GPS coordinates of ventilation shafts for the underground missile bunkers. Tomahawks don't just hit buildings. They use digital scene matching, comparing camera imagery to 3D models stored in memory. At 4:30 a.m., 80 Tomahawk missiles impacted simultaneously across 12 Iranian bases. Spider holes became tombs. Nor and Qatar missiles that were supposed to swarm the U.S. fleet were crushed under thousands of tons of collapsing rock before they could even be fueled. The unmanned boat pens in Bandar Abbas were erased. When 80 1,000-pound warheads arrive at once, it isn't a battle. It's industrial-scale demolition. As smoke cleared, carrier aircraft from the USS Abraham Lincoln moved in for surgical strikes. F-35s and Super Hornets operated in a permissive environment with air defenses destroyed. They dropped precision-guided munitions on hardened submarine piers, trapping the Yono-class subs that survived the initial wave. Small diameter bombs picked off individual mobile radar trucks and communication trailers. Meanwhile, Iraqi forces contributed their own piece. At 5:15 a.m., using American-provided HIMARS rocket systems, they launched guided munitions at Iranian relay towers along the border. These towers controlled the unmanned boat swarm. When the towers died, the remaining explosive boats lost their digital connection and began circling aimlessly like zombies disconnected from their masters. By 5:00 a.m., less than 2 hours after the tanker attack, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy had ceased to exist as a functioning force. In desperation, Iran's regular military launched Fateh 110 ballistic missiles at the USS Abraham Lincoln, hoping a single hit on an American carrier would force a ceasefire and provide a propaganda victory. The missiles screamed into the upper atmosphere at Mach 4 before plunging down at near vertical angles. But the U.S. Navy's Aegis combat system detected the launches within 3 seconds. The USS Porter's radar calculated trajectories, and determined 4 missiles were targeting the carrier. SM-6 interceptors launched from vertical cells, each carrying its own internal radar eyes. 15 miles above the Persian Gulf, the interceptors met the Iranian warheads in kinetic kills, vaporizing them instantly. To sailors on the carrier deck, it looked like distant shooting stars blinking out. The revenge strike lasted less than 4 minutes and achieved nothing except depleting Iran's remaining high-end missile stocks. The entire operation demonstrated something crucial. This wasn't about firepower, it was about the system. British intelligence provided the digital backdoor. Iraqi intelligence provided the tactical frequencies and coordinates. The U.S. Navy provided the execution. Iran spent 40 years building a wall of hardware, believing it made them untouchable. They wasted that entire strategic advantage on a single oil tanker, triggering a response that dismantled their entire coastal defense network in hours. The Strait of Hormuz, once considered Iran's fortress, is now a glass corridor. They can buy more missiles and rebuild batteries, but they can never buy back the 40 years of strategic surprise they just burned. For the world, it was a demonstration of engineering and coordination. For Iran, it was a lesson they'll study for the next generation if they get the chance. Modern warfare isn't about who has the bigger explosion. It's about who controls the logic behind it. And on March 13, 2026, that answer became crystal clear.